Thank you everyone for showing up today. I'm really excited for our first training session on Simply Reports for Technical Services. It will be recorded and then posted to YouTube after the training session. So in the email, I did send you a worksheet. If you had a chance to print it out, it's a great place to take some notes. But if you don't have a chance to be able to print it out, you can review it after the training session has ended for some additional practice. So today I will be demonstrating how to use the Simply Reports web app for technical services reports. Although many of you may have experience with Simply Reports or have been to another session recently, I'll begin by reviewing its basic functionality. After an introduction to how it functions, I will demonstrate examples of reports that will help you to gather statistics and correct errors. After this session, you will be able to refer to the examples of the report settings in the Learning Portal for additional practice. So like all of the Polaris applications, there is a training server and a production server. You can't make any changes to any records with Simply Reports, so it is okay to play around with the production version as much as you'd like. To begin using Simply Reports, you need to log in with your Polaris credentials. Only those who have permissions to access it can log in. So if you cannot log in, or if you don't see a specific type of report you're interested in running, let us know by emailing the help desk at help@ccslib.org so we can correct your permissions. We do have additional documentation on the learning portal at learning.ccslib.org/reports. You can refer to that for examples of settings that you can use for additional practice, or if you have any questions on running a specific type of report. I'll be sending you this presentation after the session is over so that you can have access to these links. So, how can Simply Reports assist the Technical Services Department? Simply Reports is a web-based report module that allows users to create custom reports based on the data in the Polaris database. So it allows you to choose specific settings, but behind the scenes, it's creating those SQL queries that Bob, our report specialist, creates, but does it automatically for you. So for the technical services staff, the types of reports that you can run include statistical information on the creation of bibliographic records and item records. So for example, you can generate a scheduled report on the number of records that you or your staff have created or modified during a specific time so that you can collect your statistics based on your production. You can also generate reports to help you identify errors or mistakes in the bibliographic and item records that need to be corrected, like the wrong material type, the wrong bibliographic primary type of material, missing price or missing statistical codes, or even missing or misspelled call number prefixes. For acquisitions, there are a number of canned reports in the client that you're probably already familiar with. However, if you would like to customize your acquisitions reports, such as filtering it differently or looking at more or less different types of data, then you can use Simply Reports to customize your reports and then export it as an Excel document. However, I have noticed some glitches with the acquisitions report, so I will cover that when I speak more on the acquisitions reports. But if you do notice a problem with some of them, you can just write to the help desk and I'll help you out. So now I'm going to review the types of reports that you have access to. So for the bibliographic records, item records, and serial records, there are two types of reports that you will see in Simply Reports. Those are list reports and count reports. There are additional types of additional types of reports that are available. Those are the history reports and statistical reports. But we do not give everyone permission to run history and statistical reports because those can really tie up Polaris and cause it to freeze. So we prefer that the CCS staff run those, or specific managers run those at night so that they can be run overnight and not tie up the system very much. The types of reports that are available for the acquisitions data are the list reports and summary reports. The summary reports are the equivalent of the count reports, but they have some additional mathematical features. So this is an example of a list report. It lists each record separately, one record per row. So the columns that you can see here are depicting the item barcode, and we've got one barcode per row. The next is a call number, browse title, collection name, the lifetime circulation count, and the last circulation transaction date are in this example. And so the purpose of running list reports are to identify specific records, and then you can also create a list for pulling items off the shelf, for example, or even create a record set from within Simply Reports. This is an example of a count report. Count reports can display the total sum of counts and monetary values for a specific category or combination of categories. So you can review two or more categories at a time. The purpose of running count reports is to tabulate the statistics and also to help you identify errors when you're comparing data across different categories. Summary reports, which are used for acquisitions, summarizes the financial data from fund codes, purchase orders, and invoices. Many of these reports that you use are also available in the staff client, but as I said, you can use Simply Reports to customize your data a bit more. So the purpose of running these summary reports would be to tabulate the financial statistics. So does anyone have any questions so far on what I've covered? If you do have a question, feel free to unmute yourself or use the chat. Okay, so now I'm going to review some of our functionality in Simply Reports. It's fairly easy to use. You just simply have to select the data and choose the filters. So at the top of the screen, you will see two different rows of tabs. The first row of tabs represents the type of data that you want to query. So for the catalogers, you'll be able to see the items, the bibs, and the serials. Acquisition staff will also be able to see the funds, invoices, and orders. And acquisition staff will also have access to the patron records and hold reports as well. Additionally, you'll have a tab called My Reports, which will allow you to access saved reports and scheduled reports. And then you'll see the Help tab, which will allow you to access any of our help files. So I'm going to be looking at the Items tab, and under that we have our secondary row for the category of report. So for items, you will be able to see the list reports and the count reports. Under that are three sets of boxes. The first box, labeled Report Output Columns, lists all of the types of data that you can choose to output to your report. It's fairly easy to select the category of data and then use the right arrow to move it to the second box. The second box, labeled column selected for output, will contain all of the data that will be output to your report. If you see something you don't want output to your report, you can simply select it and then use the left arrow to move it back to the first box. You can also use the up and down arrows to reorder the data as its output to the columns. And then the last box is for choosing how to sort your columns in alphabetical order. So you would select what you would like to be sorted in alphabetical order and use the right arrow to move it to the third box. And for any numerical data, it sorts it from the highest number to the lowest number. Below that are the settings for the files that you will be outputting. You can choose to output your report as a text file or Excel file. We usually just use the Excel file. But if you do work with MARC records and would like to do some work in MARC Edit, you have the option for creating MARC files. And then you'd be able to do more complex bulk changes in MARC Edit that you can do in the client. So below those settings are the filters. There's numerous filters that vary depending on the data that you will be querying. They start out with the general filters. So since we are looking at the item list report settings, we have item general filters at the top. So if you can think about what the item record looks like, the general filters represent the data that's in your drop-down menus. In order to use a specific filter, you need to select the checkbox, and then you can select the data that you would like to filter your report to in the menus. You can use the Shift or Control key to select more than one at a time. Below the general filters are 3 different types of date filters. So the first one is item date filters that are calendar date filters. So these allow you to choose a specific calendar date. And then next are 2 types of relative date filters. Relative date filters are really great if you would like to schedule a report to run at a specific time, like every week or every month. The first type of relative date filter is for between 2 dates, such as between 1 month ago and the report run date. And below that are the relative date filters that are labeled as prior to a specified date. So that would be for more than 1 month ago before the report run date, which could be useful to, say, find the items that you need to read from the collection, like magazines that are more than 3 years old. And below that are a variety of different filters that vary depending on the category of data. For item records, for example, you can select a range of the classification number or prefix. You can also filter based on blocks or notes or information in the bibliographic records or patron records. Are there any questions about what I've covered so far? Okay, so next, I would like to show some more functionality by demonstrating one of our examples that's in the worksheet. So example number 1 in your worksheet is how many bibliographic records did I create or modify last week? So before you run your report, it's important to know and understand the difference between the creator name and the modifier name. This information is visible in the bibliographic and item record work forms in the properties section. So here in this image, you can see the properties screen from a bibliographic record. And on the About tab, it lists the creator, the username, the creation date, the modifier, the username of the modifier, and the last modified date. And it will also have information related to, say, when the record was imported or overlaid and the import file name. So one thing to note, though, is that only the most recent modifier can be queried. So if someone modifies a record after you, and you will not be able to query that information because your name will be replaced by theirs. So if you like the idea of retaining your statistical data of how many records you modify or create, you might want to schedule your report to run more frequently. So I like the idea of scheduling the reports to run weekly for me, but for you, you may want to schedule your report to run daily in order to make sure you retain the most amount of records for your production statistics. So when you're trying to decide whether to choose to run a report on the creator or the modifier, the staff that loaded the on order record, whether it is, or even created the on order record for the item record, or loaded a final record without overlaying an existing on order record, is considered the creator. The staff that created the record in the Polaris from scratch using a bibliographic item template or creating an item records from scratch using a template is also the creator. But the modifier name is the staff that overlaid the final record over the on order record or existing final record, or the staff that edited the bibliographic or item record or deduplicated a bibliographic record. So let's go back to Simply Reports. So for creating this type of a report, it's a bibliographic count report. So to access it, first you would select Bibs on the first tab and Bib Count Reports on the second tab. So if we're using myself as an example, I've modified a number of bibliographic records lately while I've been duplicating the catalog. So my username will be the bib modifier name. If you have created records, your username would be the bib creator name. And if you wanted your statistics of item records, that would be the item creator name or the item modifier name. So count reports can look at more than one category at a time. So let's say I'm also interested in the type of materials that I've been working on. So I'm also going to add the type of material from the bibliographic record. So if you are working on reports for either bibliographic or item records, you will find that bibliographic data is labeled as MARC first. So the primary type of material in the bibliographic record is the MARC type of material for bib count reports. If I wanted to put anything in alphabetical order, I could. So let's just say for the demonstration, I'll put the type of material in alphabetical order and move that to the column selected for sort. So next, I'm going to need to filter my data so I don't see everyone's creator or modifier names. And since I'm the modifier, I'm going to select the checkbox for bib record modifier and choose my username to filter it to. So since I want to just look at a week of data, if you want, you could just look at 1 day of data if you were scheduling a report for a daily report. It's the most helpful if you want to schedule reports to use the relative date filter. So I am going to choose the modification date, since I am the modifier, of 7 days ago and the report run date, and press submit. So after pressing submit, it shows a preview. From here, if you'd like to download the report to Excel, you can check the box and press download. And here you can also save the report parameters for later use so that you can schedule your report. So I'm going to first add in my report name and a description of my, I'll call it weekly stats, and press save. So to schedule the report, you would click on the My Reports tab. So I did see a question or comment. Oh, that's just a comment. Oh, never mind. That was a private comment. So to schedule the report, you would click on the My Reports tab and then the secondary tab of My Reports to find your scheduled or your saved parameters. So in the saved reports box, the reports are listed according to the type of report. So I saved a bib count report, and this will be under bib count reports. So example 2 is the one that I saved today. Here, if you wanted to, you can choose to delete a saved report or edit it. And then under that, you can choose to run the report when you'd like to, or schedule the report. And then publish the report is useful if you want to publish the report to the client, and then other employees can access your saved report in the client. So I'm going to schedule my report today and give it a name, weekly stats, and then choose what date I want to schedule it for. So we'll start with Saturday. And then for the schedule options, you can choose to schedule it to run once on a specific date, weekly, monthly, or run daily. So when you do schedule the report, it allows you to choose the date of the week, the time. However, the times are limited. It only runs the scheduled reports during the off-peak hours, such as between 12 a.m. and 7 a.m. So I will choose 12 a.m. on Sunday and save my schedule. So these next two tabs are very useful. The file maintenance is where you will find your scheduled reports that have been run already. So under the file maintenance drop-down menu, you will see 3 different types of files that have been saved. The ad hoc reports are saved files of all of your reports that you have just run without saving any parameters. When you run these, the names are fairly generic, so it's hard to tell what they are. But if you have saved your parameters and then just clicked Run Report from your saved reports, it will also save a copy of your report on the Saved Reports Files screen. And you can easily go back to it and click on the file name to download the report. However, the scheduled reports that have been run will be saved on the scheduled reports file. So if your report has been scheduled to run Sunday at midnight and you come back to work on Monday, you would click on File Maintenance, switch to Scheduled Reports, and then click on your file to download it. And here is my report from last Sunday. So from here, if you would need to report on your production statistics, you'd be able to easily do that from this report. Okay, do you have any questions so far? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask some questions or send a message in the chat screen. Okay, since there are no other questions, we are going to now work on some examples together. So you can feel free to unmute yourself and respond or answer if you'd like, or use the chat. So we're going to continue to work on our examples in the worksheet. So example number 2 is how many new items were added last month for each collection and material type. So this is going to be an item count report, which is going to be similar to how I set up the bib count report. It's going to tabulate statistics. So when we are trying to decide what data we need and how to filter it, our first thing we need to decide is which columns and which type of data we want to appear in our report. So looking at the prompt, how many new items were added last month for each collection and material type, which columns of data do you think should be in this report?
Collection.
Collection, good.
Material type.
Material type. And potentially one more. If you have a big library that you work for with a lot of branches like Evanston or Palatine, you would also want to see the item assigned branch name in your report. Okay, so next we need to think about what filters we need to use so that we can limit our data and not look at all of the branches in CCS. So when trying to decide on filters, it can be useful to maybe write down a prompt and highlight the different pieces of it. So here I've highlighted new items, last month, and collection and material type. So thinking about this, what types of filters do you think you would use? So we do have an answer in the chat. So date filter, we would definitely need date filter.
Assigned branch.
Assigned branch, yes, assigned branch is very important. And you may even want to just look at one specific collection or one specific material type. So you could look at all of the collection and material types, or you could look at one specific option.
Or Rachel, you could break it up and be looking for the adult materials and separately the children's materials.
Yes, you could just look at the adult and children's, or just multimedia. You could look at all of, adult and youth multimedia and teen multimedia, for example. So some other filters that are important to consider are the record status. So especially when you are doing running reports on item records, you will want to choose the record status of final, because we do maintain any withdrawn and deleted records in the system until a secondary purge has been run. So that is only run once a month. So that will help to eliminate any deleted records from your reports. And some additional options you could choose could be if you wanted to filter it based on statistical class code. Say, for example, if you wanted to just run a report on one specific genre or a set of Dewey decades or a specific shelf location, material type, and even a call number range. But here's where the statistical codes could be useful. If you're interested in call number range or a genre, you might want to use the statistical class code instead of a call number range. So I'm going to go back to this and demonstrate how this would look in Simply Reports. So the prompt is, how many new items were added last month for each collection and material type? So we will add the item assigned branch name. The item assigned collection name, and the material type. So for item records, this is the item material type. If you needed for some reason to use the material type that's in the bibliographic records, you can find that listed under MARC, primary type of material. But we're just going to look at the item material type here. And we will choose Evanston for our branch today. Pick out Evanston. So if Evanston wanted to just look at one specific branch, we could just choose one specific branch in the branch filter and not look at all of them. Or we could choose two. So we'll choose Maine and Robert Crown for today. So we need to make sure to only look at final records. And oops, one thing I commonly do is make a mistake by trying to run my count report as a list report first, which I did by accident today. So here I'm still on the list reports page, but I need to click on the counts reports page and do this all over again. So that was item assigned branch name, collection name, and item material type. Our filters are for Evanston, and Maine and Robert Crown. Record status of final. And our prompt is for last month. So since we're just looking at last month, we can use the calendar date filters. And so one option could be to use the first available date to find out when they have actually been added to the collection. If you were to choose creation date, that would be when the on order item record is created. So we'll switch to December and look at December 1st to the 30th. December 31st, and press submit. So here you can see that we've got a report preview, and it has not been alphabetized. So one option would be, if you want to then alphabetize it, you can click back on your item count reports page and choose how you would like to alphabetize it. So we will alphabetize it according to branch name first, and then you can choose something like a secondary or tertiary column to alphabetize it with. So we'll do collection name second and material type third, and press submit. So now you can see that it's been alphabetized. Okay, so we did have a question in the chat from Cindy from our previous example. Are the definitions of what tasks are the creator and what tasks are the modifier listed in the documentation? So I will be sending the presentation to everyone after the session is over, so you can have that information and review the presentation. So are there any other questions so far? Okay, great. So let's move on to some other examples. So next on our list of examples are some of the reports that can be used to identify errors that need to be corrected in the catalog. So these are really my favorite types of reports to run because I love to help people find things that need to be fixed and improve the quality of the data in our catalog. So some of these types of errors are easier to identify than others. So for some, you just need to use one list report. But for others, you need to run a count report to compare the data across multiple categories and then identify those specific errors by running a list report. So we do have one question from Deborah. She says, I get confused between choosing between the count reports versus the list reports. The count reports are more for acquisitions and financials, correct? So the list reports are for when you need to identify a specific record. You can use that when you want to create a record set, or if you want to, say, print out a list of records for staff to help you find items on the shelves for pulling, like for weeding. Count reports are good for gathering statistics, like if you want to gather statistics on your production, like how many records you've created, on also for financial information for acquisition. So it's not just for acquisitions, but it can be for cataloging statistics, the amount of records you've created, the amount of items that have been added to the collection, and also for identifying errors. So I'm going to show you an example really soon about how you can identify errors with count reports. So as I said, there are two workflows in a way for identifying errors. The first is running just a list report. So this helps to identify information that is missing in your record, such as if boxes are not checked in the item record, or if a price is missing in your item record. So when you run a list report, you can identify when data is not missing by checking the box that says not present. So in this image, this is just one example. If you wanted to find call numbers that that did not have a prefix, you would check the box for prefix and the box for not present. The other useful type of filters are the checkbox filters that are available both for bibliographic and item records. So these will be for if checkboxes are present or not, but can also be for when the call number is present or not, or if the price is there or not. So for both bibliographic and item records, you can see that the first one would be display and pack checked, display and pack unchecked. So the next type of errors that you will need to be able to identify are more complex. So they require running the count report first so that you can compare data, and then a list report. So some of the examples would be like comparing the bibliographic type of material to the item material type, or comparing loan codes to fine codes and collection names to statistical codes, for example, or even identifying misspelled prefixes. So I've got quite an extensive list of the different types of reports that you can use for comparing different categories here, but I'm not going to review each one of them today. I'll be sending you this presentation so you can take a look and try to compare them yourselves after the session is over. So this is an example of what the count report would look like. If you were to run a count report to compare the bibliographic type of material to the item material type. So I have drawn some boxes in red around the potential errors. So you can see in this first row here, the bibliographic record says the item, or the bibliographic record is for an audiobook on cassette, but the item says book. And in the second row, an item says cassette. So you can see that these two are errors, because what it really should be would be that the item record should say cassette audiobook. So after finding that there are errors potentially by using the count report, you would then use filters in a list report to filter to just the bibliographic type of materials that are for the audiobook on cassette, and the item material type, for the book. And then you would be able to look at those item records and correct them. So Deborah, does that make sense in that explanation of how you could use the count reports and the list reports? Okay, great. So now I'm going to demonstrate how we would run that report. So we would have to start with an item count report. So I'm going to click on items and then counts to make sure I'm running a count report instead of a list report. So let's talk about the example of bibliographic type of material versus the item material type. Which data do you think needs to be output first to these reports? So in our example, let's see, I'm going to get rid of these previews. In our example, we have the bibliographic type of material. So we'll just start with that. And this on our item count reports will be labeled as MARC. So this will be MARC primary type of material, and that's in the bibliographic record. So, an item material type. Let me find that item material type here. Oh, there it is. Okay, so for those that do not know the difference between bibliographic, primary type of material, and item material type, I have a slide showing where that information is. So if you were to do a search in the client or LEAP, you would see results that have a format column. And so in this box, you can see that the format would be like Blu-ray plus DVD or book or ebook, for example. This is the bibliographic primary type of material. And Polaris chooses how to display that by looking at information in the bibliographic record that's found in the leader field, the 07 fields, and the 008 field. So this is the record for a Blu-ray plus DVD. But the item material type will be in the item record. And this is located in the section labeled circulation parameters in the material type drop-down menu. So next, we would choose our filters. So for our assigned branch, I'm going to pick on Grayslake today, since they're new and might have some errors that they haven't corrected yet. And since they have so many different types of material types, and we'll just want to only look at a manageable amount on our screen today, I am going to choose to filter it only to a material type of CD and CD audiobook. So we can examine a manageable amount and press submit. Okay, great. So this is fairly easy amount for all of us to just skim through. I do see several mistakes, especially towards the middle of the list. So would anyone like to take a look at this list and identify some mistakes that we should look at today? We've got an answer in chat. Music CD plus CD audiobook. Okay, let's see. That is right here. Music CD plus CD audiobook, 36. So there's 36 items. Let's see, there are music CDs and CD audiobooks. Okay, we've got some other answers in the chat. There's some video recordings and CD audiobooks. Audiobooks on cassette and CD. So audiobook on, let's see, where was that? Audiobook on cassette and CD audiobook. Good. We've got definitely a number of errors that can be identified. Here's even some vinyl with a CD type of material too. Vinyl and CD audiobook. So you can see from this list that it can be really useful to run these types of reports and make sure that all of our statistics are correct and that the type of material in the pack is displaying properly, especially for example, vinyl. You wouldn't want CDs to look like it had a vinyl type of material in the pack. It might confuse the patrons. So I'm going to choose one that was mentioned in our example in the answers as music CD type of material and CD audiobook. So what is the next step here in our process for correcting these errors? So feel free to unmute yourself and answer if you'd like.
Run a list report of all the music CDs with CD audiobook as material type.
Right. You can run a list report. So to do that, we're going to click on items as our first tab and item list reports as our second tab. So what type of data do you think you would like in a report like this when you're creating a list reports of these potential errors to correct?
Call number.
Call number could be useful.
Barcode.
Barcode.
Title.
Title. So the title will be listed under mark. So we have a mark sort title or a mark title. So the mark sort title doesn't include the non-filing characters. Might want the author too. You may even want the bibliographic record ID so that you can find the bibliographic record. And we already know what material types these are, but we'll need to filter them. So we're going to filter with using the library quick pick to select Gray's Lake. And so the next is deciding which material type filters we need. So if we look back at our preview, we've got the mark type of material as music CD. And so that is the bibliographic record filter. So what you need to do to find that is go down to the bottom where it's labeled bibliographic record filters and choose the primary type of material for music CD. Unfortunately, this is not in alphabetical order, so you have to scroll down through it to find it. And the next column we had in our material type description is for the item record. So that's CD audiobook. So that would be in the item general filters. And you would click material type and select CD audiobook. We'll also want to only identify final records. You don't need to look at the deleted records. And then press submit. Okay, so here is our preview. Since there are 36 here, we wouldn't necessarily immediately want to look at all of these 36. So it could be really useful at this time to create a record set. We can create the record set and go back to it some other time. So I'm going to name it GRK for Grays Lake and correction, or you can name it whatever you want. And this will be, and then I'll have a note. This is music CD with material type audiobook. And press save. So what you would then want to do is take a look at that record set in the client. And this will save an item record set since we were working with an item list report. If you want, you can convert it to a bibliographic record set by pressing this create bibliographic record set. And that will create the bibliographic record set of all of these items. Let's just take a look at this one. So here you can see in this alphabet zoo, this material type is CD audiobook. And if I click on the bibliographic record, I can see that this is, looks like it actually is an audiobook and not a music CD. So here, we'd want to be able to identify which types of data we need to correct. So if we look at the leader, we can see this is a musical sound recording. But for example, I'm not going to correct this now for Grace Lake. Since this is actually an audiobook, they would want to change it to the non-musical sound recording. And likewise, we'd want to check the 07 and compare that to the chart to make sure that we have the correct 07 field and the correct information in the 08 field. So in many cases, it could be as easy as doing a bold change, but in some cases like this, we'd want to, just double check and make sure by looking at the records to understand which is correct. Is it the item record that's correct, or is it the bibliographic record that's correct? Are there any questions about these types of reports? Okay, so let's move on to our next example. So we started with one of the harder errors to correct because that needs a lot of analysis and it can be time consuming, especially when you have to review the different records. But our next example is a bit easier. That example is number 5 on your worksheets. Which item records are missing a price? So all this would require is an item list report. What data do you think you would like to see output to a report about missing price?
Barcode.
Barcode, yeah. you may want some other information like the item title, material type, and so forth. You may even want to add the circulation status. Then you could identify if it's an on-order record or not. So let's find that. Item circ status is item circulation status.
Call number in case I need to get it from the shelf.
Call number. And we'll add author and title as well. You may also want shelving scheme if you're going to get it from the shelf. Or not shelving scheme, the shelf location, I mean. So that would be the item shelf location. And I'll add the mark author and mark sort title. So I put these in an order that doesn't necessarily make sense, so I can use these up and down arrows to reorder it. Okay. So let's choose a different library. We'll use Algonquin this time. And what other filters would you like to use to find the items with the missing price? Well, we'll only need to use the record status of final. One problem for missing price is that all of our electronic records are missing a price. So we do not want to look at those. So we're going to choose specific material types. And not choose any of the electronic material types. I'll just choose those for now. And the most important filter is the item checkbox filters. This will allow you to find anything that is missing a price. So down here we have price present or price not present. And now I'll press submit. Okay, so from here, since we've got 211 records to look at, it's probably the easiest to then create a record set. So I'll just call that ALK, missing price, and then press save. And then you can go back and work on that another time or have one of the other staff members help you with it. And you can then work on it as you have time. So we have some other questions here. Cindy says, what does the mark title not include? So you will find mark sort title, mark title, and at times in some of the other reports, there will also be a mark browse title. The mark sort title and the mark browse title are the same. So mark title does include the non-filing characters like the, a, and, but the sort title and the browse title do not include the non-filing characters. So Brenda asks, could you also filter by vendor? Let's see. Yes, so under the item general filters, there is a vendor account. And you'd be able to filter by vendor here. Are there any other questions? So one other thing that I think is important to add is, why would you want to run a report and identify the items that are missing a price? Well, if you are needing to create a report to for insurance purposes, for example, that lists the value of the collection, you'd be able to include a much more accurate report of the value of the collection. If a price was included on the item records, you'd be able to run a count report to identify the value of the collection. It's also very important for those times when the item is missing and you need to charge a patron. If there's no price in a record, the patron will be charged a default price. And so if a patron lost an item that cost more than $25, you could potentially be losing out on money if they lost that item if you didn't have the price in the record. So are there any other questions about this type of report? Okay, so now let's talk about some serials examples. So in your worksheet, if you have that available, that is report example number 6. So my first question is, which magazines can be withdrawn? Now I know some of you may be using the serials module, and some of you may not be using the serials module. And this report can actually be run with the serials list reports, but if you do not have a serials module that you are using, haven't chosen to use it yet, then you can use the item list report instead. But today for the example, I'm going to be using a serials list report. And then I'll just add in some comments about what you might want to do if you were running an item list report instead. So if you are looking for the serials issues, the magazines that need to be withdrawn, say ones that are more than 3 years old, what would you like to have in your serials list report? Any ideas?
Serial title.
Serial title. So one thing about the serials list reports is that it is looking at a lot of different records. The serials holding records are connected to item records, issue records, bibliographic records. So we've got a lot of different types of data to look at when you're looking at these serials list reports. So you can see at the top of this, anything in the serials holding records is labeled as holdings first. But if we're looking for the title, we will want to use the information from the bibliographic record. So that, as I said before, is labeled as MARC. So here you've got the MARC browse title for what you would output to the report. Any other guesses of what we should output to our report?
The issue.
Issue. So instead of looking at holdings, we'll want to look for the word issue. So this will be pulling information from the issue record. And what we'll want for the issue is the issue/part designation. Now, if you were to not be using the serials module and would want to run an items list report instead, you can look at the creation date of the item record, or potentially look at the call number field for the issue designation instead of the issue part designation. And for some of the larger libraries, you may have multiple different collections. So you could choose the holdings record destination collection name, for example. And for those that don't use the serial holdings records, you would be able to use the collection name or shelf location in the item record. But unfortunately for the serials list reports, you cannot choose the shelf location. I'm not sure why, because that would be really helpful, but there's no item shelf location. But I know some of you use the magazine or magazine new. So the magazine new could be for the ones that are non-circulating and not really necessarily be new. You might want to use the item material type if you are identifying those non-circulating magazines.
You'd also want the barcode. Like if you have multiple copies of the same magazine, you want to make sure you get the right one.
We can definitely output a barcode. And I'll reorder these a bit. Okay, so now we need to decide how to filter it. So we've got just as many filters as we do various different choices of data. We've got our holdings record filters for our serial holdings record, issue part filters for the issue record, and if for some reason you've decided to use subscription records as well, but I know that very few libraries, if any, use those, there's subscription record filters too. However, the publication pattern filter is separate from the holdings record filter for some reason. I'm not sure why they did that. But we are looking to identify the older magazines. So we will choose Algonquin for our library today. And our next thing we need to decide are the date filters. So since we are pulling the issue part designation from the issue record, we will have to use the issue part date filters. And we have two options here. There's the issue part date filter for the calendar year and the relative date filter. So they haven't separated the two types of relative date filters. Here they only have them under one, but there's still the between and more than as your options. So because we're looking for records that are older, we'll want to use the more than date filter. So we're going to use a chronology date of more than 3 years ago before the report run date, and press submit. And so here you can see that there's still a handful of records that may potentially need to be weeded from the collection. And so if you were running this as an item report instead of a serials report, the date filter that you could use could be for the creation date of the item record or the first available date of the item record. Are there any other questions? So Joe asked, can you include circ status with this report? So circ status, if it exists, would be listed under item. And we do have item status, so I'm going to add that. So one thing about Simply Reports is that in this report output column section, not everything is has the same exact name on each of these report pages. So while on the items report, it's the item circ status, but on the serials reports, it's item status. So here you can see we added the item status to the last row. Are there any other questions? So this is another example where that it could potentially be more useful though to, if you wanted to create a record set and only had the, well, if you only used item records and not the serial holdings records, if you were running the item list report instead of a serials report, you'd be able to create the record set and then do the bulk change to withdraw and delete items. But obviously for the serials holding records, if you have check-in records and issue records, that's not possible. So here, because we're doing a serial holdings record report, it does not allow you to create that record set of the item records because you still have to go back to your check-in record to delete the issue from your check-in record, and don't have that option to do it in bulk yet, which is unfortunate. So if you don't use that check-in record, you'd be able to take advantage of the record sets that serial holding record users can't take advantage of. So let's move on to our next example. That is example number 7. And this will be a serials count report. So the prompt is, which magazines have the lowest circulation count? This is useful if you were, for example, assessing your subscriptions to decide if you want to stop your subscription to a magazine that is not popular. So to access it, you should click on serials and then serial count reports. You could also, as I said, if you don't use the serial holdings records, run this as an item count report and be able to also see the circulation statistics from the item count report as well. So either way will work. So what would you like to add to a count report for the serials? Holdings title. Holdings title is really all you would potentially need. But here, that title is actually under Mark as the Mark Browse title. So we'll use that. And the location that we can find our statistics is the circulation information that's connected to the item record. So all of our circulation statistics are actually listed as sum. So we've got sum item lifetime circ count. That could be useful. This year, there's very little circulation of magazines. So I'll output it, but it's not going to be useful. That's the sum item YTD, which stands for year to date circ count. And then we will choose our filters. So I'll just choose Algonquin since it's at the top and press submit. So you can see how low our year-to-date cert count is. So that's not very useful at all if we were to do this report this year, but we'll want to download it. And since there's 100 rows that are only allowed in the preview, we'll just look at this in Excel and I'll open it. So you will see this pop-up message when you open a file in Excel because it's a .xls file. You can just press yes. And because this is a count report, there will be the number of records listed in the last row. And we can then sort this from greatest number or lowest number, depending on what we're looking at. So using this A to Z sort button on Excel, I'll press sort smallest to largest. And we can see our lowest circulation count for lowest lifetime circulation count. So Cindy has a question, is the year to date based on fiscal year dates? No, it is not based on fiscal year dates. It's based on the calendar year dates. Because all of the libraries have different fiscal year dates, Simply Reports can't process that individually, except for when you're choosing the fiscal year for acquisitions reports. So are there any other questions? Okay, so now I'm going to move on to the acquisitions reports. So as I mentioned initially, there have been some very odd glitches that have been occurring with acquisitions reports. And so Polaris, Innovative, is aware of it. They have them listed as known bugs, but they don't have plans to fix these very quickly. So I don't want to scare anyone by telling you there's glitches, and I still think that there's plenty of options for running acquisitions reports without the data or filters that cause the glitches that can be very useful. So these acquisitions can be visible and are easy to catch in the report when very specific columns are used or very specific data is used and when specific filters are used. So some of the examples of the glitches that can be found are like when sums are larger than the amount allocated to a fund. Like if you only allocated $5,000 to a fund and you did some of the amount expended, but the amount expended came out to be like $25,000 or something ridiculous. Or you can see a header invoice charge for $25,000, which is ridiculous. And there's no invoice charge on your, no header invoice charge on your invoice. Other problems could be like if you chose a filter and there were no results found after using the filter. So the specific one that I found was the canceled order filter, which does not work. And another problem that I've identified is an inability to calculate percentages. So if you were doing the fund balance report in Simply Reports, you would want to calculate percentages in Excel and not using Simply Reports. So if you do find any glitches, feel free to send us a message in the help desk and let us know. We can help you run reports around those glitches. And we'll also send a message to Innovative to make sure they're aware of which glitches we find. So let's talk about some acquisitions examples. In our worksheet, number 8 is how many titles did the library order from each vendor in the last fiscal year? This could be potentially helpful if you were trying to assess your amount of orders that you've ordered from the vendors, and maybe you'd be interested in not ordering from a specific vendor anymore if you've ordered very few titles from the vendor. So this could actually be run as an order summary report or an invoice summary report. Either way would work. So let's see, I wrote order summary report on the slide, but today I'm just going to use the invoice summary report. Actually, I meant to correct that. So to access that page, we will click on invoices and then invoice summary reports. So if you were thinking about running this type of report, what data would you like to have output to your report? Feel free to unmute yourself if you have an idea of what you'd like in these reports. If not, you can use the chat as well. So fiscal year name is a good idea. Vendor. So in Simply Reports, the vendor is labeled as the supplier name. Now, the quantities are a bit tricky to figure out which one that would be. So that would be labeled as a sum. So we've got multiple different quantities that it can tabulate. It will tabulate header charges separate from line item charges. There's some that are labeled segment grand totals or quantity totals. There's line amount. So the line amount is actually exactly the same here as the sum segment grand total. So if you wanted to look at the total amount spent for each vendor, you could do that. You could also just look at the quantities. You could, and this one is the sum segment quantity received. So we'll do those for now. So right here in this box that's set aside from the other filters is our fiscal year status and the fiscal year drop-down menu. So because we're looking at the last fiscal year, that would be closed. However, for the libraries who use the type of fiscal year rollover that replicate the fiscal year, they may still have their fiscal year under encumbrances closed and not closed. So I'm going to choose encumbrances closed and choose one of these that are still labeled as encumbrances closed. And we'll pick on Evanston. And so looking at these types of filters that we have, since we're already choosing the specific fiscal year, you wouldn't necessarily need to choose the invoice paid by, because that's already one specific library anyway. But if you wanted to, you could choose status. Now, if you were a library using encumbrances closed, you still have some invoices that are open on that fiscal year. So we could just choose paid if we wanted to. But if your fiscal year has already been completely closed, you don't need to use status. You could look at all of the statuses. And we'll just press submit now. These acquisitions reports do take a bit more time to run. So once you've downloaded this report, you'd be able to sort it, examine the different vendors that you would use, and decide, maybe if you only bought one item from Amazon, maybe there'd be a different vendor that you'd want to use instead, and so forth. Are there any other questions about this type of report? Well, our next example on the list is example 9. It's another invoice summary report. And this may be one that you would find more useful than the previous report that I ran. That's which invoices were paid last week. So maybe if you needed to take a look at a list of the invoices, double check with the business office, for example, to make sure that they received the full list and so forth, that could be potentially useful. So are there any ideas of what you would like to have on your report for your list of invoices that were paid last week? Supplier name. We do have a number of different sums. Some of them work and some of them don't, that we could choose from. So I'm going to demonstrate an example here of one of the glitches that we have. So anything labeled sum invoice header does not work, and you should not use it. So I think anything just labeled sum invoice in general, well, some invoice line amount did work, but these sum invoice headers are definitely glitchy. So I'm going to choose sum invoice header grand total so you can see our glitch. But we will also want to add, let's see, invoice number. You may want to add fund name to a report, but if you do add fund name and there's multiple funds used per invoice, it will create multiple lines and not just one line. So potentially you might just want one line per invoice. So you would want to leave the fund name out. So I can add the fund name, and you can see that here. Oops. Where is that? Oh, here it is. Never mind. Fund name. And for our amount for the invoice, I recommend the sum segment grand total. And shipping charges and tax and so forth are separate. So you may want to add in separate columns for that. So we have the sum segment shipping charges. And I'll just leave it on this first CPQ fiscal year. And we'll choose the invoice date is one option, but you could also choose the payment status date for when it's been paid. So we'll use payment status date for last week. And press submit. So here you can see, because we added the fund name to this report, it's created multiple lines for one invoice. So I'm going to go back and remove that. And you'll get a more succinct report. And that's removed a lot of the extra lines here. But here you can see what I mean by this glitch. It's got this invoice header grand total of very high amounts. Like this one Amazon invoice has an invoice header grand total of $33,052.56. So I'm not sure where they came up with that from behind the scenes, but Innovative is aware that that's a glitch and does not work. So you would want to remove that and never use that from your reports. So the segment grand total should be the correct amount for the invoice line items added up together. But if you are concerned about the glitches, you can always just check that, make sure that the invoice amount is correct by looking back at the actual invoice in the client. So are there any questions about that report? Okay, so I'm going to demonstrate one more example. One that if you work with the reports in the client, you're probably very familiar with. It's the fund balance report. But if for some reason you'd like to filter it a bit more and only include certain funds, you'd be able to do that in Simply Reports. So thinking about the fund balance report, what types of data are output to the fund balance reports? Fund name.
Mhm.
And we can put that in alphabetical order by fund name. What else should we put in our report today? Fund free balance. Okay, so if we go down to fund totals, we also have our amounts allocated, encumbered, and expended. And the percent here does not work, but we'll just add it to the report. Just for an example, so that you can see how the glitch doesn't work, how the glitch functions. And there's our fund pre-balance up there. And we'll just use this fiscal year that's right at the top. And press submit. So I'm going to download this report and open it in Excel. You can see how the percentage is off a bit. So if you wanted to calculate the percentages in Excel, it's pretty easy to do. You just press equal sign, total amount expended divided by the total amount allocated, and drag it down to the bottom. And it will calculate all of the percentages for you. Change that to a percent. Okay, so if we compare these two percentages, you can see that Simply Reports is just off slightly for some reason here, but Then for some other fun codes, it's off quite a bit. So it's just another glitch to be aware of, that the percentage doesn't work, but it's fairly easy, as you saw, that you can just calculate the percentage in Excel and drag the formula down to the bottom. So are there any questions about this report? So that is all of the examples that I have for today. So if there are any requests, we do have some time left. If you would like me to demonstrate a specific report, I could do that. But if there are no other questions or requests for specific reports, we are welcome to adjourn our training session today. So Joe requests scheduling reports. Yes, I can cover scheduling reports again. I do have a handout. I think I sent you the handout on saving and scheduling, but I will send it again when I send out the presentation to make sure everyone has it. So once you have set up your report, I'm just going to choose some random parts of data to export a report and press submit. It's not really a useful report, it was just random. But you would then want to save your report parameters for later use by giving it a report name and pressing save. So then under my reports, you can access your report according to the category of data. So for example, I initially demonstrated the bib count report and saved that. I have a number of bib count reports saved here. If you, let's see, bib, I also have a bib list report saved here. And if you click on the different types of reports, you can find your count reports saved under item count reports and so forth. And so today I will schedule my item count report example by selecting it and press schedule reports. So then you can name your scheduled report, select your date that you want your scheduled report to start running, and then choose when it needs to run, whether it's once, weekly, monthly, or daily, and the time. And press Save Schedule. So that report will be run automatically according to the schedule that you've specified. Then you can pick up your report by clicking on Scheduled, or by clicking on File Maintenance. So since that was a scheduled report, you would click Scheduled Report Files and click on the name of the report to download your report that has been scheduled. You can also then choose to edit your reports by clicking on Scheduled Jobs and editing them, or if you want, you can delete them here. One other thing that is useful that you can do from my reports is to, let me choose the item count reports again, is to publish the report if you want to share it. with another coworker. You can select the report and press Publish Report to publish it to the client. You can give it a name and choose if you want it to output as landscape or portrait, and then choose which branch to output it to. So I'll output my example to Cooperative Computer Services, and then you can choose if you want to output the report to your personal folder, which will be under your username, or the branch folder. So I will put it in my personal folder and press Publish. So one other option too is if you were to publish the report and press Advanced Publish, that would give you some more options in the client, such as choosing which branch you are. So to find those, you would go to Utilities, Reports and Notices, and click on Custom. So under Custom, I've clicked on Cooperative Computer Services, and we've got our example reports here that you can see these have been output to the branch, and the ones in these username folders have been output to my personal folder. And when we click on it, it runs the report and generates the report of item counts. Joe, do you have any other questions about scheduling reports? Okay, great. Are there any other questions for today? We've got about 15 minutes left. Well, if there are no other questions for today, I will be sending you an email with the presentation, the answers to the worksheet, as well as the link that will be in the presentation for the learning portal. If you have any questions about how to access the learning portal, if for some reason you need the password still, or if you need to update your permissions for Simply Reports, you can just send us a message at help@CCSLib, and we can help you out. I'll also be sending out a survey for any advice that you have on how to improve our training session for today. So this is my first time doing the training session on this topic, and even for doing my second time doing a live synchronous training session since I started working here only a year ago and had to work from home since then. So I would really appreciate any feedback that you have on how we could improve our training sessions. So thank you everyone for showing up today. I hope you have a really great day and have some fun in the snow.